Welcome to Iran Today News, ladies and gentlemen. O-1 in cities like Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Petah Tikva, the streets bear the scars of this conflict. Shattered homes, damaged infrastructure, and the echo of air raid sirens. Yet, amid the destruction, widespread public support persists. In Petah Tikva, where a missile strike killed 4 civilians and damaged numerous apartment buildings, many residents affirmed their backing for the air campaign, citing fears over Iran potentially acquiring nuclear capabilities, and declaring that military engagement is necessary to safeguard Israel. 791-1 Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's stance has grown noticeably more assertive. Labeling the Operation Rising Lion, the military campaign targeted Iranian nuclear and energy infrastructure in Tehran and beyond. 1199-0 In an ABC News interview, Netanyahu made a stark declaration. Eliminating Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei would decisively end the crisis, explicitly appealing to the Iranian public to rise against their government. 1448-0 He described Iran's, Hitler's nuclear team, as a direct existential threat to both Israel and the United States, framing the campaign as a strategic strike with broad moral legitimacy. 1652-0 Analysts point out that Netanyahu has a long-standing belief in military action as the only way to truly deter Iran's nuclear ambitions, rather than diplomacy. Past efforts, including the U.S. pullout from the JCPOA under Trump, have failed in his view, making this campaign a gamble on military force as the ultimate solution. 2010-0 Yet experts caution that dismantling Iran's probabilistic and deeply fortified nuclear program might be far more complex than anticipated. While early strikes may have crippled uranium enrichment efforts, Iran's dispersed infrastructure renders complete eradication unlikely short-term. 2354-0 Within Israel, the crisis has reshaped domestic politics. Netanyahu's bold moves have rallied public support and temporarily quelled internal tensions. Analysts emphasize that to retain momentum, his administration must convert military action into tangible success, and resist being mired in an open-ended confrontation. 2707-1 From a strategic perspective, Israel has executed one of its most coordinated hybrid campaigns yet. The effort included clandestine Mossad drone operations inside Iran, utilizing small UAVs to disrupt missile launchers and air defenses, and followed by aerial strikes targeting missile depots, nuclear sites, and IRGC command centers. 3236-1 On the military front, early assessments suggest Israel achieved near-aerial dominance over Tehran for periods, striking over 100 critical targets and severely impacting sites like Natanz, where the IAEA noted severe damage to around 15,000 centrifuges. 3637-0 Simultaneously, Iran responded with missile and drone barrages on Israeli cities, killing civilians in Tel Aviv, Haifa, Bat Yam, and beyond. 3823-0 Israel's multi-layered missile defense, including Iron Dome, has intercepted many projectiles, though some breakthroughs resulted in casualties and infrastructure damage, particularly at oil facilities. 4057-0 Strategic analysts warn that the initial military gains may trigger dangerous escalation. Iran is reportedly accelerating its nuclear efforts in response, and rogue elements might pursue unconventional paths, including chemical or rudimentary nuclear armament as deterrence. 4375-0 Israel's move to strike Iran's state television, used for both news and military communications, also drew condemnation. Iran denounced it as a war crime that targeted press freedom. 4589-0 Leading President Trump to caution that additional American steps might be required to restrain further escalation. 4737-0 Internationally, the picture is muddled. Israeli and American leaders assert the campaign curtails a nuclear threat. Trump's administration, linked politically and strategically, has suggested willingness to act but frames Israel's actions as self-defense. 5051-0 Yet within the U.S., lines are divided between military hawks demanding full backing and voices urging restraint to avoid broader war. 5216-0 European leaders are pushing for urgent de-escalation. The G7, with Canada, the UK, France, and Germany, plans emergency sessions to coordinate responses. European officials urge Israel and Iran to resume diplomacy and avoid further refugees, disruptions to global energy supplies, and terrorism threats. 5553-0 Iran, for its part, has suspended scheduled nuclear negotiations with the US and its partners, stating that serious talks are impossible while under attack. 5745-0 Amid these developments, both nations face humanitarian paths. Iran has experienced an internal refugee crisis as tens of thousands fled Tehran to safer provinces following Israeli bombardment, including strikes near civilian zones and hospitals, triggering fuel shortages, blocked internet access, and widespread panic. 6099-0 in Israel, the Home Front Command has imposed maximum alert, with schools shuttered, gatherings banned, Ben Gurion Airport closed, and emergency shelters activated. 6285-0 embassies, businesses, travelers, and global financial markets are scrambling. Middle Eastern airspace is tense and travel advisories are sharply elevated. 6472-0 Israeli public discourse acknowledges both the necessity and risks ahead. Many echo Netanyahu's declaration. As long as Iran pursues nuclear weapons, aggressive responses are justified. At the same time, there's growing anxiety over the cost. Public support may decline if the offensive fails to achieve its goals. 6821-1 Critics also question whether eliminating Iran's leadership or nuclear assets truly paves the way to peace, or whether they might trigger desperate behavior. Former PM Ehud Barak and Western intelligence officials argue that strategic patience and pathways to regime change via diplomatic pressure or internal change may outperform airpower alone. 7394-0 Diplomacy remains in a precarious position. Iran has approached Oman, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia to appeal to Trump for a mediated ceasefire. Tehran is willing to consider resuming nuclear dialogue, but only once military aggression stops. 7652-0 NATO and UN leaders have stressed that without negotiations, the region risks decisive breakdown, not only of security but also of global economy, oil prices fluctuating and humanitarian crises surging. Summary of Israel's side views and developments. 7887-0 Public sentiment. Broad support persists despite civilian loss, common belief in the necessity of halting Iran's nuclear ambitions via military action. 8119-0 Political narrative. Netanyahu frames strikes as existential defense, asserting potential endgame via Khamenei's elimination, sees Iran's nuclear program as reaching a tipping point. 8339-0 Strategic rationale. Seen as continuation of Israel's preemptive doctrine, blending covert Mossad operations and extensive airstrikes targeting infrastructure and leadership. 8567-0 Military assessment. Early dominance observed, though Iran's retaliatory missiles breached defenses, Israel's strike on Natanz knocked out much of the centrifuge capability. 8792-0 Analyst opinion. Short-term achievements are overshadowed by doubts over dismantling Iran's entrenched nuclear program, risk of escalation through unconventional or WMD tactics. 9017-0 Political implications. Netanyahu's approval is bolstered, domestic pressure may rise if the conflict drags on without resolution. 9185-0 Regional consequences. Displacement and refugee crises unfold, global oil markets wobble, diplomatic bridges with Europe and US increasingly strained. 9390-0 Diplomatic outlook. Iran conditions diplomacy on ceasefire. Europe and G7 push for negotiations, risks remain high for broader conflict. Looking ahead, Israel faces difficult questions. Can military tactics yield lasting security? Will Iran retaliate in unpredictable ways? And can diplomacy re-enter the picture before the conflict spirals? For now, Israeli sentiment is firm. However, both military analysts and citizen voices are keenly aware that a long struggle could unsettle the country's social, political, and economic fabric.